Alicia had always trusted her instincts. Working as a maid at the prestigious Grand Riviera Hotel, she had encountered all sorts of guests, some kind, some rude, some completely unmemorable. But every once in a while, she came across someone who made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. And that's exactly how she felt the moment she saw the man and the little girl check into room 814. It wasn't anything obvious. He had the look of an average businessman, pressed suit, expensive watch, neatly combed hair. The little girl with him couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. She clung to his side, her tiny fingers wrapped around his wrist. Her face was half hidden behind long curls, and she didn't say a word, even when the receptionist smiled at her. Alicia had seen tired children before, cranky from travel, but this was different. There was something in the girl's eyes, something that made Alicia pause. She watched as the man signed the check-in form, his grip on the pen tight. His voice was calm, polite, but there was tension in the way he moved, as if he were constantly aware of his surroundings. When he reached for the keycard, his hand shook ever so slightly. Alicia didn't know why, but a cold feeling settled in her stomach as she watched him lead the little girl toward the elevator. The next morning, when Alicia started her rounds, she noticed something unusual. The Do Not Disturb sign was still hanging on the door of room 814. Most guests would be out by now, either exploring the city or enjoying the luxurious breakfast spread in the dining hall. But the door remained shut, the hallway silent. She hesitated for a moment, then moved on. Maybe they just wanted privacy. Hours later, when she returned, the sign was gone. Taking a deep breath, she knocked lightly on the door. No answer. She knocked again, this time louder. Still nothing. Slowly, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air felt heavy, as if the room had been sealed off for too long. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the bright Miami sun. The bed was untouched, the covers neatly spread, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. Something felt off. As Alicia moved deeper into the room, she noticed a pile of papers on the desk, crumpled, as if someone had gripped them too tightly. She was about to take a closer look when she heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the bed. Her breath hitched. She turned slowly, eyes locking onto the slightly lifted edge of the sheets. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers grazing the fabric. And then, just as she started to lift the sheet, the door creaked open behind her. She spun around, heart pounding. The man stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes dark. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Alicia swallowed, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I was just..." Before she could finish, the little girl peeked out from behind him. For a brief second, their eyes met, and Alicia saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear. Deep, unmistakable fear. Alicia knew, without a doubt, that something was terribly wrong. Alicia forced herself to remain calm, though her heart pounded against her ribs. The way the man stood in the doorway, blocking the exit, sent a chill through her. His expression was composed, almost too controlled, but his eyes held something deeper, something guarded. The little girl, still partially hidden behind him, clutched the fabric of his suit jacket. Her knuckles were white. "I was just here to clean," Alicia said, choosing her words carefully. "I saw the Do Not Disturb sign was gone and thought it was okay." The man's gaze didn't waver. His fingers tapped against the doorframe, a nervous habit. "We don't need cleaning today," he said, his voice even. "You can go." Alicia hesitated. Everything inside her screamed that she shouldn't just walk away. But what could she do? She was just a maid. She couldn't accuse a guest of wrongdoing without proof. Yet, that feeling in her gut, the one that had never failed her, kept nagging at her. She looked at the little girl again. The child's lips were slightly parted as if she wanted to say something but didn't dare. Her big brown eyes darted to Alicia, then back down to the floor. Alicia noticed faint bruises on her wrist, barely visible under the sleeve of her dress. A lump formed in Alicia's throat. "If you change your mind about the cleaning, just let me know," she said softly, lingering for a moment longer. The girl's eyes flickered up again, a silent plea flashing across her face before she quickly looked away. Alicia stepped out of the room, the door shutting behind her with a quiet but final click. As she walked down the hallway, she felt a strange pressure in her chest. Something was definitely wrong. She had worked in this hotel long enough to recognize the usual signs of troubled guests' arguments between couples, business travelers under stress, parents exhausted from wrangling their kids. But this was different. She returned to her cart, gripping its handle tightly. She needed to think. She couldn't just ignore this, but what could she do? Calling hotel security would be extreme. After all, she hadn't actually seen anything criminal. And yet, the way that girl looked at her. Alicia knew that look. It was the look of someone too afraid to ask for help. As she continued her rounds, she found herself circling back to room 814 more than once. Each time, the door remained shut. No movement, no sounds from inside. It was as if the room had been swallowed into silence. Later that evening, as Alicia clocked out, she debated telling someone, her manager, maybe, or even the front desk staff. But something told her the man would be careful. He would have a perfectly logical explanation for everything, and she would end up looking like a fool. Instead of going straight home, she lingered in the lobby, pretending to check her phone. The hotel's restaurant was visible from where she stood, and she scanned the tables, searching for the man and the little girl. They weren't there. Most guests eventually came down for dinner, especially those with children. But room 814 remained absent. Her stomach twisted in knots. What was he hiding? Just as she was about to leave, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me." Alicia turned to see a woman standing at the front desk. She looked worried, glancing around as if searching for someone. "My husband and daughter were supposed to check in earlier today," the woman said to the receptionist. "But I haven't been able to reach them." Alicia's breath caught in her throat. She knew, deep down, what the woman was about to say before the words even left her lips. "The reservation should be under Mark Reynolds," the woman continued. "And my daughter's name is Emily." Alicia's heart pounded. Room 814. The man. The little girl. Something was very, very wrong. Alicia's breath hitched as she watched the woman at the front desk. The name she had just spoken echoed in her mind, Mark Reynolds. The man from room 814. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she processed what was happening. The woman was searching for her husband and daughter, yet they were already in the hotel. But why hadn't she been able to reach them? Why would a father take his child somewhere without informing the mother? The receptionist typed quickly, checking the system for the reservation. "Yes, we do have a Mark Reynolds checked into room 814, she confirmed. "They arrived earlier today." The woman let out a breath of relief but still looked uneasy. "Then why hasn't he answered any of my calls?" she murmured, almost to herself. "He said he would keep in touch." Alicia swallowed hard, her thoughts racing. Should she say something? She barely knew the details, yet every instinct inside her screamed that something was off. Before she could decide, the woman straightened her shoulders. "Can I get a key to the room?" The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, but only the guest who checked in can authorize an additional key." The woman's face fell. "I'm his wife. My daughter is in that room, and I can't reach them." Her voice wavered slightly, but there was a quiet strength in her words. "Please, can someone check?" Alicia took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady. "I was cleaning earlier today. I saw them." The woman turned sharply, her eyes locking onto Alicia's. "You did?" Alicia nodded. "Your daughter," she seemed quiet. Nervous, even. She hesitated before adding, "and I noticed bruises on her wrist." The woman's expression shifted instantly, fear flashing across her face. "Bruises," she whispered, her hand pressing against the counter for support. Alicia glanced at the receptionist, who was watching them both with a mix of concern and uncertainty. "Maybe security could check in on them," she suggested, careful with her wording. The receptionist hesitated for only a second before picking up the phone. "I'll send someone up." As they waited, Alicia watched the woman closely. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her breathing uneven. Whatever had led to this moment, it was clear that she feared for her daughter's safety. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, a security guard appeared. "I knocked, but there was no answer," he reported. We're going to have to use the master key. The woman wasted no time. Let's go, she said, already moving toward the elevators. Alicia hesitated, then followed. She knew she had no authority to be involved, but something told her she needed to see this through. As they reached the 8th floor, Alicia's pulse quickened. The hallway was eerily silent, the air thick with anticipation. The security guard inserted the master key, and the door clicked open. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn. The bed was unmade, the air thick with an odd, stale scent. Alicia's eyes swept across the space, searching. The man, Mark, was nowhere to be seen. But then she spotted movement. The little girl, Emily, sat in the corner, curled up on the floor, her small body trembling. Her mother gasped, rushing forward. Emily. The girl flinched at first, but as soon as she registered the voice, she sprang to her feet, running straight into her mother's arms. Alicia exhaled in relief, but something still felt wrong. "Where's your dad?" the security guard asked. Emily's grip on her mother tightened. She shook her head, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "He left," she whispered. The mother's expression darkened. "Left? Where?" Emily's lower lip trembled. "He said he had to go before someone found us." Alicia's stomach dropped. Before someone found them? What did that mean? The security guard was already speaking into his radio, calling for backup. "We need to check the security footage," he said. "See where he went." Alicia felt her heart hammering. This was far from over. Mark Reynolds had run, and that could only mean one thing: he was hiding something. Something big. And whatever it was, they needed to find out before it was too late. Alicia felt the tension in the room tighten like a noose. Emily clung to her mother, her small fingers digging into the fabric of her mother's blouse as if she were afraid to let go. The woman ran a trembling hand over her daughter's hair, whispering reassurances, but her eyes betrayed her panic. The security guard's radio crackled, and a voice came through. "We checked the cameras. The man left through the side exit 10 minutes ago. No vehicle on record. He's on foot." Alicia exchanged a glance with the mother, who stiffened at the news. The fact that Mark had left on foot meant he wasn't just stepping out for air, he was escaping. But from what? Emily sniffled, pressing her face into her mother's shoulder. Alicia knelt beside her, keeping her voice soft. "Emily, sweetheart, do you know where your dad was going?" The girl hesitated before shaking her head. "He just said he had to leave. That he couldn't stay anymore." Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through Alicia. If Mark had planned to leave without a trace, then he must have known someone was closing in on him. But who? The security guard turned toward the mother. We need to notify the authorities. Do you have any idea why your husband would be running?" The woman bit her lip, looking uncertain, but then exhaled shakily. "Mark, he hasn't been the same lately. He's been secretive, paranoid. I thought it was just stress, but then he started talking about taking Emily away for her safety. I thought he meant from me. But now," she trailed off, fear flickering in her eyes. Alicia's mind spun. What if Mark wasn't running from them, but from something else? Something bigger? The guard nodded. "I'll call the police." Emily whimpered, her grip tightening on her mother. "Mommy, I don't want Daddy to come back." A chill ran down Alicia's spine at the quiet confession. Whatever had been going on in that hotel room, Emily was afraid. And fear like that didn't just come from nowhere. The mother took a shaky breath, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "You don't have to see him, baby. I promise." But just as she spoke, a sharp noise echoed from the hallway, a heavy thud, like something knocking against the wall. Alicia's breath caught, and everyone in the room went still. The security guard's hand hovered over his radio. "Stay here," he whispered before stepping toward the door. He cracked it open slightly, peering into the hall. Silence. Then, another noise, a shuffle, quick and quiet. Alicia's pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced toward the mother, whose face had drained of color. Emily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, too scared to even breathe. The guard opened the door wider, stepping out into the hallway. Alicia held her breath, waiting. A long moment passed. Then, a sudden shout. The security guard stumbled backward into the room, eyes wide. Go. Now. Alicia barely had time to process what was happening before she saw the shadow in the hallway, a figure moving fast, heading straight for them. Mark. His face was twisted with something dark and unreadable, his eyes darting frantically around the room. Give her to me, he rasped, voice hoarse with desperation. The mother wrapped her arms protectively around Emily, shaking her head. No. You're not taking her. Mark took a step forward, but the security guard blocked his path. Sir, back up. Alicia could see the way Mark's hands trembled, the wild look in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. But of what? I didn't mean to, he whispered suddenly. I didn't mean for it to happen. The mother stiffened. What do you mean? Mark's breath came fast and uneven. They're coming, he muttered. They know. I have to leave before they find me. Alicia felt her blood turn cold. Who's coming? Mark looked up at her then, his eyes full of something close to despair. The people I ran from. And then, before anyone could stop him, he turned and bolted down the hall. The security guard rushed after him, but Alicia knew, deep in her gut, that this was far from over. Whatever Mark was running from had just caught up to him, and they weren't far behind. Alicia stood frozen in place, her heart hammering in her chest as Mark's footsteps faded down the hallway. The security guard had taken off after him, but deep down, she knew that Mark was desperate enough to disappear before anyone could catch up. Emily clung to her mother, her small body trembling with fear. The mother was whispering to her daughter, trying to soothe her, but her own hands shook as she held the girl close. Something about Mark's words lingered in Alicia's mind. They're coming. They know. Who were they? And what did they know? The tension in the air was suffocating, but before Alicia could ask the mother more questions, a sudden noise crackled through the security guard's radio. A distorted voice came through, urgency laced in every word. We lost him. He ran through the back exit, but there's something else. There's a black SUV parked outside. Tinted windows. No plates. Alicia felt a chill run down her spine. That wasn't just some random vehicle. It was waiting for Mark. The mother's grip on Emily tightened. We need to go, she whispered, as if instinctively sensing danger. Alicia nodded, but before they could even make a move, the radio crackled again. They're getting out of the car. A heavy silence filled the room. Alicia's mind raced. This wasn't just about a man running from his past, this was something bigger, something darker. She turned toward the mother, lowering her voice. Is there something you're not telling me? Tears welled up in the woman's eyes, but she swallowed them back. I swear, I don't know what's happening. Mark was always secretive, but he kept saying we had to leave, that someone was looking for him. She hesitated, voice trembling. And that if they found us, we'd never be safe again. Alicia's stomach twisted. This was worse than she thought. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Alicia's breath hitched. Whoever was out there wasn't running like Mark had, they were taking their time, as if they already knew there was nowhere to escape. The mother backed away from the door, her breathing shallow. Emily whimpered softly, clinging to her. Alicia reached for her phone, but her hands were clammy, her fingers trembling as she tried to dial for help. The doorknob rattled. Alicia sucked in a sharp breath, her pulse roaring in her ears. Then, the door burst open. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in all black. His face was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Emily with chilling precision. Behind him, another man appeared, his expression cold and calculated. Emily let out a frightened whimper, and her mother stepped in front of her protectively. Who are you? She demanded, her voice shaking. The first man ignored her, his gaze never leaving the little girl. Where is he? Alicia felt her stomach drop. They weren't after the mother. They weren't after Alicia. They were after Mark. The mother shook her head frantically. I don't know. The second man's eyes narrowed. We don't have time for this. He stepped forward, reaching into his jacket. Alicia's instincts screamed at her to do something. Anything. Before she could react, a loud voice rang out from the hallway. Step away from them. Now. Alicia turned just in time to see the security guard standing at the entrance, his hand hovering over his radio. He was outnumbered, but he didn't back down. The men in black exchanged a look. Then, without another word, they turned and walked out. Just like that. Alicia let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, but the fear in her chest didn't ease. The men had left too easily, too quietly. They weren't giving up. They were just getting started. Alicia barely had time to process what had just happened before the security guard turned to her and the mother. "We need to move. Now." His voice was firm but urgent, his eyes scanning the hallway. The mother clutched Emily tightly and nodded, her entire body trembling. Alicia could see it, the overwhelming fear, the desperation to keep her daughter safe. But there was something else too. A realization. The mother turned to Alicia, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I know why they want Mark." Alicia's pulse quickened. "Tell me." The mother swallowed hard. Mark wasn't running from something he did. He was running from something he knew. Before Alicia could press for more, the security guard motioned for them to follow. "No time. We have to get to the service exit before they change their minds and come back." They moved quickly, sticking close to the walls, trying to stay out of sight. Alicia could hear her own heart pounding in her ears as they made their way through the dimly lit corridor. Every shadow felt like a threat, every distant noise like footsteps approaching. As they reached the service exit, the guard cracked the door open just enough to peek outside. His body went rigid. "They're out there." Alicia felt a rush of cold fear. "How many?" "2 by the car. But they're not looking this way yet." The mother clutched Emily tighter. "What do we do?" Alicia's mind raced. They couldn't stay here forever. And Mark, he was still out there somewhere, running, hiding. She didn't know if he was the key to all of this, but she knew one thing: those men weren't going to stop until they found him. The security guard exhaled sharply and pulled out his radio. "This is Martinez. We need backup at the service exit. Now." A tense silence followed. Then, a crackling response. "Copy. Units are on their way." Alicia didn't know if that meant they had minutes or seconds, but it was enough. The men outside hadn't noticed them yet. Maybe, just maybe, they could buy themselves enough time. But then, Emily made a small noise, barely more than a whimper. It was enough. One of the men turned, locking eyes with Alicia through the small opening in the door. For a split second, no one moved. Then he reached for his jacket. Martinez reacted instantly, shoving the door open with full force and knocking the man back. "Run," he shouted. Alicia grabbed the mother's arm and pulled her forward. They sprinted through the door, past the struggling men. The mother held Emily close, her breath ragged, her feet barely touching the ground as they ran. The second man lunged toward them, but Martinez blocked his path. "Not today," he growled, shoving the man back. They reached the parking lot just as sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing closer. The men froze. Then, as if making a silent decision, they turned and ran, disappearing around the corner before the police cars even pulled in. Alicia doubled over, gasping for breath. The mother collapsed to her knees, still clutching Emily. The little girl was crying softly, but she was safe. The officers poured out of their cars, surrounding the area. One of them approached Martinez. "Where'd they go?" "Back alley." "They won't get far," Martinez replied. As the officers fanned out, Alicia turned to the mother. "What do you know? What was Mark running from?" Tears welled in the woman's eyes, but she forced herself to speak. "Mark worked in cybersecurity. He found something big. He never told me what, just that it was dangerous. He said if they ever found out he knew, we'd have to run." Alicia's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about Mark. It was about information, something so important that people were willing to hunt him down for it. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Alicia turned sharply, scanning the shadows between the buildings. And then she saw him. Mark. He was standing just beyond the reach of the flashing police lights, watching. His face was pale, his eyes filled with something Alicia couldn't quite place: relief, fear, regret. Their eyes met. Then, before she could say a word, he turned and disappeared into the night. Alicia's breath caught in her throat. He was still running. And whoever was after him, they weren't done yet. Alicia stood frozen for a moment, her heart still pounding as she watched Mark disappear into the darkness. She wanted to run after him, to demand answers, but she knew it wouldn't be that easy. The police were still securing the area, and the mother, Emily's mother, was still shaken, holding her daughter as if she might disappear at any second. Alicia turned to them, her voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now," she said, kneeling beside them. The mother nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Emily looked up at Alicia with wide, innocent eyes. "Is my dad going to be okay?" Alicia hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep. "He's trying to protect you," she finally said. "And we're going to do everything we can to help him." Just then, Officer Martinez approached, his face tense but calmer than before. "We've got patrols sweeping the area, but those guys are pros. They know how to disappear." Alicia sighed. "And Mark?" Martinez shook his head. "Gone." Alicia wasn't surprised, but it still stung. She looked at Emily, then back at her mother. "He won't stay gone for long. Not if he knows you're safe." The mother nodded, gripping her daughter's hand. "I just want him to come home." Alicia knew the feeling. She had spent the past few years chasing truth, solving stories that felt impossible, but this was different. This wasn't just a mystery, it was a family torn apart by fear. And fear was a powerful thing. Over the next few days, Alicia worked closely with the police, piecing together what little they had. Mark had left behind traces, hotel records, old security footage, messages that hinted at something bigger. But the true reason he was running remained buried. Then, just when she thought the case was about to go cold, she received an email. No subject. No sender name. Just a single message. "Thank you for keeping them safe. They know I know. I can't stop now. But I won't let them win." Alicia's breath caught. "Mark." She read the words again, feeling the weight behind them. He wasn't just running. He was fighting back. She glanced at the mother and Emily, who were staying under police protection for now. They had each other. They were healing. And Mark, wherever he wasn't giving up. Alicia closed her laptop and exhaled deeply. Some stories didn't have neat endings. Some mysteries stayed unsolved. But this wasn't just about answers, it was about choices. Mark had made his. And Alicia? She had made hers too. She would keep searching, keep uncovering the truth. Because sometimes, the people who needed it most weren't the ones looking for it. Sometimes, they were the ones running from it.